And we are live. Hello, everybody. Thought I'd jump in a teeny bit early, by a matter of a couple of minutes. Just popping out to chat. There we go. How much should one charge for a half-dragon warhound? Ooh, quite a lot, I'd imagine, because training those things is a pain in the ass. Mainly because quite often they're intelligent. The cheese ritual, yeah, the cheese ritual is over. I'm actually involving myself with a small yogurt snack here at the moment, frozen yogurt snack. Hail, yip top! Good evening, Shady Grin. Juju Bear, Mason. Fika, welcome to the stream. And to all of my regulars. As you can see, I'm wearing my Matthew Colville Kickstarter reward shirt. Matthew Colville DM. And it does have the Earth Elemental steps on your head to make sure you are dead on the back. Very stylish. Very good shirt. Amigo? Adam, nice to see you. Kenneth? Nicholas? Darkstrider? Wow, there's a lot of you in here. Hello, Sweden. Yes, I did hear about the fossil parrot they found in New Zealand, Sinsu. It's a giant, basically the equivalent of the kakapo, just big. And it had more of a protein diet. Carnivorous. You did, Chase. Welcome. Mr. L? Hey, thank you, Oakley. Welcome. Thank you very much. Does YubTub have the power of demonetization? Yes, I imagine so. Terra Parrot, not quite. Oh, good. I'm glad that a lot of people got the use out of the Wasteful Earth video. Exactly, Green Scythe. Time to relax. Hercules Kakapo. I said in a previous live stream that powerful entities created the Feywild. Well, the Feywild is on the border of the astral plane. So it's the border between the astral plane and our reality. Or the reality of the D&D game. So, in a way, it is created of fairy tale, but also it's real. It's real and it's story at the same time. So it's bounded by its own rules. And stories and fairy tales and things are created by living beings. So powerful entities created the domains of the Feywild, those stabilities of the Feywild that aren't completely all over the place. Fairies are much more used to a chaotic sort of existence where the rules of their reality may change and they just go along with it, like children playing a game. And they're not so used to the idea of a fixed reality and fixed, rules and things like that. So fairies can have quite an alien mindset compared to beings of the prime material plane. Cheese. This is what flavor? I'm not sure actually. They don't actually have flavors listed on them. There's just seems to be a random assortment, and it doesn't really matter what color the packaging is. They've got ones which have got a sort of a fruity fruit juice coating on the outside of them. They've got other ones which are like this, which are just pure frozen yogurt. Does talking about Forgotten Realms metals and materials count as retro D&D? Found a bunch in the Forgotten Realms wiki, like Dlarin and Darksteel. Darksteel, yeah. Exactly, Robert. It is a massive book, yeah. Gaming does require snacks, it's true. Bananas are a good option. Also, dried fruit and things, and you've got to keep your liquids up as well. Gaming, or particularly role playing, is a very mentally engaging exercise. So it can tax your brain. So coffee is pretty good. Hey, thanks, Kickass Duke. Sitting in Red Rock Brewery in Salt Lake City when I got the notification about the stream. I hate to miss these, but I'm in a fun town, so enjoy all. Oh, absolutely. Go have fun, man. I'll catch you on the next stream. You are correct, Dragon Turtle. Yeah, winter and like the Halloween sort of vibe is pretty good for a Feywild, which is dark and mysterious and weird. Just think of what happens in a nightmare, and that's what happens in dark Fey situations. If phlogiston blocks interplanar travel, what happens to outsiders and the souls of mortals when they die there? No, it doesn't block interplanar travel. What have you recently heard, Robert? Hey, Bedbear. Oh, you're correct, Dragon Turtle, that I don't really want to talk about gods in this stream. Yes, dwarves do use moonlight in their crafting. Dwarves and elves, one of the few races that can actually condense moonlight, and through mysticism turn it into a physical object. Thank you, Jason. Speaking on the Fae, why are Fae locks so underused? They're pretty awesome. They are pretty awesome. I think because in many situations the Fae patrons are more involved in their warlocks' lives to an annoying extent and to a sort of a fickle extent as well. Like they'll actually mess with their warlocks. So maybe there's that concern that by playing a Fae lock, you may lose control of your character's destiny a little bit. I don't know. That's my personal take on it. Some dragon hybrids are sterile, yeah. Not all of them. In the original, and when Dragonborn first came along, they were created by Bahamut from his loyal followers in his fight against Tiamat and Tiamat's machinations of evil, where she was creating spawn that were too powerful for ordinary mortals to contend with. So he created the Dragonborn from willing participants, and because he didn't want it imposed, this transformation imposed on their offspring unwillingly, he made them sterile in that case. So they couldn't have children because he didn't want their children to have no choice whether they were dragonborn or not. Since that addition, dragonborn have now bred true, and so obviously that wasn't the same in every plane of existence. Any suggestions for a bard who doesn't use an instrument? I know dance and oration can take the place of musical spell. Any historical references? Oh, sure. I mean, skalds and things like that. Certainly there are a lot of poets and singers. Singing is perfectly legitimate as far as I'm concerned for being able to cast bardic magic. I think one of the good things about having an instrument is because the instrument can be lost or taken away, or an enchanted instrument can be used. Whereas if your bard just deals with singing as their primary means of using their spells, then perhaps they can't enchant their voice, so they actually lose out a little bit. But they gain something in that they've got the utility of not having to rely on an instrument all the time. The Frostwind Virago. I can find out about it. I don't know anything off at the top of my head. I think I might have actually used one of them before. It's a fey-like creature. I think I have actually used one from the Creature Codex, and it was good. It was just sort of on the side of a encounter. A Feylock. So that's the Fey Pact Warlock. So it's a warlock who has a Fey patron. Yubtub. So using elements from other planes of existence to create magical items gives them that otherworldly quality. In the original D&D article in, I think it was Dragon Magazine, they were talking about the idea behind the +1, +2, +3 was the number of planes of existence in the materials that go into that item. So not only do you have to enchant against or protect against the ordinary mundane material in that weapon, you also have to enchant against the extra planar properties of that weapon breaking through your defenses. So it's not only sharp on this plane of existence, it's sharp on another plane of existence too. So that was that whole idea of it being a mystical exotic material. And the tradition of having star metal blades, for instance, so meteoric iron is actually no better than any other iron, but mentally, mystically, in story and stuff, it's exotic and more interesting. So by extension, the idea of materials and metals and things from other planes of existence make an item more storied and legendary and magically interesting, so that makes them more powerful. So that's that tradition behind writing that into the stories. I don't think it's got a whole lot of consistency over the various different editions and different settings, so you're free to come up with a lot of different ideas for that. Like, for instance, I like the idea of a Mordor blade being imbued with necromantic energy, so that the wounds don't properly heal, or abyssal steel, or there's the book series Sparhawk and the Red Gold. So a particular nation on that world has this red gold, which is infused with some sort of demon power that makes people avaricious, greedy, and evil. And the more of this red gold they acquire, the more they want more of it, and the more unsavory things they'll do to get it. Hey, thanks, James Green. James Greenan says, AJ, are most of the paths to life extension in D&D soul endangering? If so, is it a matter of course, or because evil entities are well aware of their effectiveness as soul traps? So it's certainly in their best interest to disrupt the natural order of things. And in that regard, it's evil entities that don't necessarily care about the acquisition of one or two souls. So they will trade that information for magically proficient individuals to do things for them in the mortal world. Otherwise, there are paths, of course, to immortality that don't involve endangering your soul, and monks and druids are the perfect example of that, where they can actually attain a level of immortality without endangering their soul or doing anything wicked or evil. It's just a matter of personal mastery and being in tune with your environment to such an extent that they no longer age, and they don't suffer from entropy or disease or poison. Thanks, Blue Mountain Gaming. You got promoted sergeant now with the National Guard. Nice one. How is rank handled in Dungeons and Dragons? Traditionally, if we're talking retro today, so in the past, player character classes had different titles for different levels that they were. So, for instance, the other day I was talking about how Aragorn, the Ranger, was modelled on the character Aragorn from Lord of the Rings directly. So, one of the as you level up as a Ranger in old school D&D, you actually took the title Strider at one level of your character class. And so they had different, fighters went up to becoming knights, generally speaking, or, champions of the realm and stuff. And you had cavaliers and paladins and things. Like, you couldn't be a paladin at level 1 for a character, and you had strict sort of level requirements, and you had to, it sort of started off as a prestige class, cavaliers as well. These days, you've got a lot more flexibility in the first 3 levels of your character that you can really put yourself on into the guided path towards whatever sort of character you want to make. And I agree with this. I don't really like the way that 3.5 and Pathfinder made you take feats and accrue tiny bits of what you needed to make your character what you wanted it to be. So it was like you had to go adventuring and struggling just to make the character you wanted to make to go adventuring in the first place. And that's kind of a dick move for a rule system to play. It's kind of like that repetitive sort of thing you get hooked into cell phone games for, like tiny incremental rewards that drive you further and further and further into the game. And it's also how they do monetized packages and stuff. So you want to get that extra gun for your robot or something like that, or that package that you pay money for. You don't really need to pay it, but you do. So 5th edition is better because feats are more an inclusive package that you can take that feat and it will give you archery skill to the extent that you would have to spend several levels in 3.5 to get that. So you have something from every plane, you get a plus 39 item. Not quite, but you get the idea. I'm just saying that's the original idea behind the +1, +2, but of course it's moved on since then. Yes, the Elenium and Tamuli series and the Belgariad. Yeah, and the Molorian. Those are really great stories. The Murgos, yeah, that's it. That made the red gold. Belgariad, sorry. Right author, wrong series. I wonder what Sparhook would do if he met Belgarian. David Eddings. Yeah, it's too much work. And of course, devotion to a greater power. Hey, Instructor Boy. Or Indestructo Boy. Any thoughts on the Pathfinder 2 class system? I haven't had a look at it yet. It's only been out for a little while, and Pathfinder is outside of my purview of interest, really. I will have a look at the second Pathfinder book and the system, and I've noticed that they've made a few changes to it. But I agree with Hankerin. Hankerin Ferndale, and he was talking about how it's a hell of a price point to get into the hobby. If Pathfinder is expecting, if Paizo is expecting people to pick up Pathfinder 2 as a brand new role-playing system, then publishing a 600-page core manual, plus the monster manual, plus player's guide, plus the dungeon mastery guide, and plus a setting update book, that's a significant wad of money to put down if you're just getting into the game. And it's a totally different tack from the proven and effective method that Wizards of the Coast and TSR before them have used, which is producing a beginner box, a basic box set, or the beginner boxes, or the essentials boxes that Dungeons & Dragons has done. So it's a much better marketing tactic. So getting people interested in the game, getting people aware of the system, and they can try the system out in a complete package because it's got everything you need to play in that little box. And then if they get into it, they can start to invest in the books properly and build it up as a game. Or they can just play it online. and use the D&D Beyond resources, which have the advantage of being perfectly portable. So anywhere I go in the world, I have all of my D&D Beyond stuff on my phone or on whatever computer that I log into. I don't have to log my books around everywhere. I do prefer having books, but I really love having the books and the reference material on the computer at the same time, particularly as most of my gaming experience is through streaming by live internet chats with people, because I live out in the country, so I don't get to meet face-to-face with people very often. I do prefer to sit down at a table and play with people, though, for sure. Missing something? No. I think I will have another yogurt block, though. So, another thing that a lot of people talk to me, and particularly people who object to things that I say in my videos and things, often people who think that I'm making stuff up. And just to remind people that I played every edition of D&D apart from the original white box set, and I will get around to doing that eventually. But when I started out playing D&D, it was through D&D Basic and Advanced Dungeons and Dragons. And I have played every edition since. I didn't make the split from 4th edition to Pathfinder like a lot of people did. I've never taken a break from the hobby of several years and then come back to it, which a lot of people have done. I have played consistently Dungeons and Dragons for the majority of my life, and I'm very used to it. However, it is not the only role-playing system that I've played. By far, I've played huge amounts of different role-playing systems. One of my favourite is the Palladium system, and for all its flaws and things, it's the one I'm the most familiar with. So I can actually make and run a Heroes Unlimited game based purely off my knowledge of that game, without actually referencing any books and stuff. I know pretty much everything there is to know about it because I've played it so much. So yeah. Also, even though I played these role-playing games for a very long time and am a huge aficionado of the lore and things like that of the game, I have no objection to playing a extremely rules-light narrative-based game on a streaming or in-person play. So one thing I did once just to prove a point was I made a single-page RPG system called the D4 system, where literally all you roll is a 4-sided dice. That's it. And really, dice rolls can be expressed as something as simple as the four results on a 4-sided dice. You've got miserable failure, just failed, just passed, and passed with flying colours. That's it. Everything else is just nuance, really, in rule systems. But the actual dice mechanics come down to simply that. That's it, really. So that's a perfectly workable system. Yep, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, Robotech, Ninjas and Super Spies, Rifts, Scrapers, Phase World, Wormwood. That's right, yeah. Elminster, Mordenkainen, those characters. Have I? Yeah, I've played all of them. I played all of the Palladium books, apart from System Failure. I haven't played that. Hey, Ricky. Yeah, there is a Kiwi on my mug. Cheers. Yes, Mason, they can. Yeah, so once you've condensed moonlight into a physical substance, it doesn't require further magic to stay that way. Well, it's not that they haven't boycotted the Avarial from D&D, they just haven't covered them. The Avarial are a lot rarer in Forgotten Realms than other races of elves and things. But of course, the problem with the Avarial now is that it's conflicting somewhat heavily with Jeremy Crawford's, or Mordenkainen's, point of view of the elves. So, where do the Avarial fit into that origin story and that whole reincarnation idea of Jeremy Crawford's elves? Shadowrun. No, I haven't played Shadowrun. Call of Cthulhu, Toon, Car Wars, Paranoia, Traveller, lots and lots of Traveller. Lots of different games, really. Even Mythrogue. A Vorpal sword can cut off a dragon's head on a roll of 20, yes. Yeah. Elminster's had an interesting life, to say the least. I am Matt, yes. My favourite wizard subclass at the moment is Abjura. I don't think Wizard of the Coast hates flight that much. They've still got a carryover thought that certain modes of play are more appropriate for low-level characters, which I think is ridiculous, and they should drop that idea immediately. There's no reason why low-level characters can't go on a planescaping adventure, for instance, or become involved in the Feywild or the Shadowfell and things. In fact, how do you have a horror campaign without something like that having a looming threat? I don't believe in a world partitioned up into things which are too difficult for characters to face, are just not there until the characters are ready to face them. I think that's ridiculous as well. And one of my main objections to 4th edition in that regard. 5th edition seems to have finally bridged the gap where we have a system that actually works cohesively over all of the character levels. And so, no, I don't think flight should be a restriction, because really, if you've got objections to characters having flight in your game, then you're just not you're not versed enough in challenges for flighted characters. Really, it's a failing as in your imagination as a storyteller, and you should probably educate yourself a bit more. That being said, you can say that certain characters and things don't exist in the game, or just have no interest in being in the game. And also, one of the things that I see quite often is characters that have flight, like the Aarakocra, for instance. Aarakocra have terrible claustrophobia and hate going inside of buildings, and certainly never sleep inside of a building. So you're quite within your rights to say culturally, physically, your bird character is not going to do what these other characters do, and so there's quite a disadvantage. Your Avarial character is much more in tune with a different mode of thought, a different operation throughout their day-to-day life. They're not concerned with human cities and things like that. They just generally don't get involved. Your Aarakocra character is not going to go exploring a dungeon. They're not going to go into a crypt or a graveyard or anything like that, or go into a tomb or a cave, because that is anathema to everything they hold dear. They want the open sky. It's as simple to them as needing to flee to the sky at the first sign of trouble. So I think it's not so much the problem with the winged characters that people have a problem with this. It's a problem with the fact that people metagame and don't play those characters like they should. Yeah, you and me both, William. Vorpal weapons aren't that common, no. I haven't played Stars Without Number, I don't think. I mean, once you've played Traveller, why do you need to play any other D&D game or any other sci-fi type game apart from Warhammer? Warhammer 40k is fantastic. I love those adventuring games. It does seem to be most of the hatred of flying characters come from Dungeon Masters. It's true. And I've seen... What can I say? I've seen a lot of armchair Dungeon Masters complaining about it. I haven't seen a lot of active Dungeon Masters complaining about it a whole lot, really. People who DM games all the time are kind of like, yeah, okay, bring it at me. I'll see what happens. If they have practical concerns that they're raising as a topic of their conversation instead of just a knee-jerk reaction to a flying character being, oh, it's bad, it's like, no, give me a specific example of a problem that you have with your winged player character, or I'm not interested in your conversation. I'm interested in practical DMing conversations, not your opinion on something. Hey, thank you, James. Does socioeconomic class influence what school of magic young wizards learn and employment? A battle mage, necromancer, abjurer, etc. Wow, that's a really good question. That is a really good question. So your socioeconomic class of your character, the lifestyle that they were raised in, obviously is going to have a huge effect on their personality, their experience, their worldview, the haves and the have-nots. So a person who's off the streets, a street urchin who happens to have a lot of magical talent, first of all, are they even going to have access to the literature they need for a grounding in education before they will even be accepted into a wizard school? Because wizard schools, as opposed to sorcery, for instance, sorcery is this natural born font of magic which comes through you. Wizards, on the other hand, are all about learning and academia. And obviously, like going to a college or something like that in our world, it's going to help if you come from money. Absolutely. So, yeah, that's your first question is, do the people who from a lower economic status even get access to going to a wizard academy? Second, it would be, what is their family orientated around? Is it trade? Is it law and order? Is it ruling? Things like that. So a good example would be, let's take from popular media, Harry Potter and the Malfoys, for instance, born into a magiocratic mindset. And in Dungeons and Dragons, particularly on the Sword Coast, where a lot of the adventures and things take place, you've got the legacy of Netheril, for instance, and the legacy of Empire. Netheril has a lasting legacy in Dungeons and Dragons, not only in the amount of literature and stuff that they produced on magic, because you can't, it's like learning about philosophy, you learn about Greeks, because you have to. You learn a lot about German philosophers and things like that, because they are the ones who crafted the scope of the lore. In Dungeons and Dragons, a lot of the lore comes from Netheril. A lot of the spells that the spellcasters learn comes from Netheril. So, yeah, really good question, man. That's more so than I could talk about. I could talk about that all hour, really, of this live stream. Yeah, I've played, what have I played? Rogue Trader, Dark Heresy, and also a little bit of Death Watch for Warhammer 40k. I have not yet played the one with the Imperial Guard, but I really want to. Traveller. Yeah, Traveller role-playing game is about space travel. Yeah, a bat, a humanoid bat player character would be interesting. So they've got agoraphobia, maybe. Never want to go outside the cave. Can I do Skyrim gods? No. Highly unlikely I'm going to do anything from Morrowind. I know, yeah, Warhammer 40k does inspire that sort of passion in people because it's got very thick, dense lore on it as well. If I could develop the Forgotten Realms Aussie continent, what would you have a homebrew humanoid race? Yeah, probably. Obviously, lizard folk, I think, would be one of the major races there. Ed Greenwood desperately needs to kill Al Minster. Why would he want to do that? Yeah, Traveller and Mega Traveller. Yes, obviously a rich wizarding student would have not only access to magical tutors, but also tutors in trade, business, and academic studies. Also, so for instance, Jim Darkmagic from Acquisitions Incorporated is an interesting character because he comes from a rich background, and for him, it's more about being a flashy ne'er-do-well, famous figure, really using his magical power for fame and being a celebrity in Dungeons and Dragons, which is really interesting. It's an interesting concept of a character who's not adventuring just for personal wealth. He's doing it for influence and fame. So I'm not going to go on a quest unless people are going to talk about it for years afterwards. I'm not going to go. I'm not interested in just anybody's problems. I'm interested in stuff that is going to turn my character into a legend, and then I'm going to ride the coattails of that fame to the bitter end. That is an interesting character to play. A narcissist. And that character is not necessarily evil. They can appear to be lawful good to those around them, when in actual fact they're neutral, because they're just doing it for their own self-interest. It's not necessarily evil to do that. A picture series in that section about inventing a character's background about a girl. Oh yes, Mimi in the in that book it's talking about developing your character's backstory as their progression through life. So what happened to them to make them into the current person that they are. So in that particular case, it was like a street urchin who turned into a pirate and then became a proficient character in that series of images. Yep. So yeah, when you've got a first level character who's got a feat as an acolyte, for instance, and their idea is that they're a thief with some magical power, and then later on you're going to transition to being a cross-class arcane trickster, for instance. And a lot of people would say, why would you take rogue and arcane trickster? Why don't you just take that from the beginning? Why cross-class into something later on? It makes no sense. But from a character development point of view, some people like creating a character based on the events that happened in their character's life. And also, I really love people who cross-class based on what their character has ended up doing in the game that they never intended to do at the start of that campaign. So characters that organically turn into something which is kind of a broken character build, but it makes perfect sense for what that character's progression through that campaign story is. That is really good role-playing. Elminster is still alive, and he is ageless. He's not immortal. I think he can actually die. But again, in Dungeons and Dragons, you quite often get resurrected. Green Scythe, I'll think about it. I might do some aquatic ones like Were Crocodile, for instance. There's something retro which I wanted to make some videos on, which I think is always a little bit relevant and kind of interesting, is the Vati, the Wind Dukes of Aqua. Because they are really important to the elemental plane of air, and also a lot of the history of D&D. And also Spider Fiends will be coming up in the Demon series, and the Hounds of Law are a lawfully aligned creature. And there's lots of different spider fiends actually, and the whole idea of why Mishka the wolf spider was such a powerful demon is kind of interesting. So I might make videos and talk about that just out of my own self-interest, and I hope you guys find it interesting too. Yeah, rich students may have access to, because wizards, they can make a lot of money, and it's certainly they are consulted for their knowledge because they read a lot. So they're sages as well as being wizards in general. Sometimes they can have a bit of an unsavory reputation. Some of them actually cultivate that. I mean, there's a million different types of wizard, ways of being wizard. They're so variable. But of course, you can also have wizards who seek patrons. So the idea is the court wizard, or the wizard that works for sea captains and things like that. So weather wizards and war wizards of Cormier, for instance. And the idea of a society wizard that learns magic to advance their social status and to basically give themselves a nice cushy place where they can research stuff and become possibly a famous wizard researcher, somebody who's invented new types of magic, because there's certainly a legacy of that in Dungeons and Dragons across multiple worlds. That's why we have spells with wizards' names on them. Mordenkainen's Magnificent Mansion, and Bigby's Grasping Hand, and things like that. Oddluke's Fear, Learmon's Tiny Hut. Who are these people? See Emiliana. Elminster became a chosen of Mystra, and I think part and parcel of that was immortality. Not only that, but wizards, when they get to a certain level of skill, I think learn a little bit of necromancy, where they just sort of softly take energy from other living things around them, such as, keeping the grass down by draining a little bit of energy from their lawn, for instance, is not necessarily evil. Necromancy doesn't have to be evil, but taking a little bit of energy from living things around you to sustain your own life, or just a little bit every day, and you'll have wizards that will live for thousands of years. Yeah, Volothamp, perfect example. Spider Fiend. Hey, look out, they're really mean. Exactly, Dragonlord. If you were to make a Yugoloth player character, what would it be? Arcanoloth. Why are there so little summoning spells in the game, especially for arcane spell casters? I understand not having that too many, but why not have spells to summon one or two things? Well, I think what they've gone with is the general track of you learn how to make a summoning circle, and then from there it can specialize in particular things. The assumption is that your character will learn the specific stuff to draw forth a thing. One of the things I quite like is, like, if your character wants to summon a specific fiend, for instance, you could have a quest where they need to learn the fiend's name, what their weakness is, what their motivation is, what their history is in the prime material world that your character's on, to better give bonuses to turning that fiend to your to control them properly. Otherwise, if you're just randomly casting that circle, you better hope for a reasonably lesser monster that you can dominate. Otherwise, you could be in severe trouble. I mean, I don't know how many adventures in D&D are based on the idea of a fiend is loose because some idiot spellcaster summoned it to the prime material plane without proper protection or preparation, and it got out, and the first thing it did was kill them. flying spiders. Well, there are flying spiders. They don't have wings. They ride around on threads of web. Passive necromancy, yeah. Mosquitoes can be harmless. They don't drink blood all the time. It's only the females that do, by the way. Male mosquitoes did nothing wrong. And what's worse is they make more noise when they're flying through the sky than female mosquitoes do. So they get squashed more often. You can tell it's a male mosquito because it's got those long, fluffy antlers. Fluffy antenna. Females don't. It's for picking up the female pheromones. Male mosquito's like, girl, you smell so good. Where do I stand on whether or not creating and using undead is inherently evil or not? Okay, let me give you a perfect example. What if you gain the ability to raise dead right now in the real world? And you went down to, like, first of all, where are you going to get hold of a dead body? Are you going to go and dig one up from a graveyard? Or are you going to go to the city morgue and hopefully, sneak in there and steal a body? Does that seem like something that a good person would do? Be honest now. Be honest. Let's say you're going to, best case scenario, you go to a battlefield or something like that, or an ancient site where there's lots of skeletons of people who nobody no longer identifies, or it's a mass grave or something like that, and you've taken bones from there, or you've gone to a museum and taken bones out of an exhibit or something like that. But otherwise, it's somebody's relative, it's somebody's daughter or son or mother or father or grandparent that you have suddenly gotten up and is walking around and probably being horribly brutalized because of the tasks that you've set it to do. It's a callous and horrible thing to do. At the very least, it is certainly not a good thing to do. So that's where I stand on it being inherently evil. It's not so much the use of magic to raise the dead. Not only that, but when you're raising a skeleton, for instance, you're putting an evil character, an evil entity into that corpse to animate it, like a possessing entity. It's like you're deliberately haunting a doll. So therein you're providing a doorway for an evil creature to come through into this world and animate that skeleton or zombie. Or particularly skeleton. Zombies not so much. The other alternative is you use the animation spell to animate an object, and that object just happens to be a skeleton, bones and things. And why not then do it on a table or a golem or something like that? Why does it have to be a dead body? So, yeah. If you want to justify it, sure, find some way. But I'm telling you that from where I sit, I can't see a good person doing that. Yeah, it's an executed criminal, blah, 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 sure. But therein lies the breakdown of, okay, on a perfect scenario, your argument may be correct, but in general practice, in general play in Dungeons & Dragons, that's not going to happen. Your necromancer is not going to wait for an executed criminal, it's just not going to happen. So it's a moot point. Your body's donated for science. In Dungeons & Dragons, you're sure. Well, there's a slight chance that you may be risen from the dead and your body walk around and kill people. It's like, I'm not happy with that, man. I thought, you was... Yeah, exactly. I mean, if I could use necromancy to knock mosquitoes out of the air, for sure I would do that. Yeah, so undead livestock. That's probably the best scenario I could think of for how somebody would use necromancy for a reasonably good purpose. Like a zombie, Is a zombie inherently evil? Nah, I don't think so. A skeleton is inherently evil and will try to kill things around it. Zombies, I don't think so much do. When they're left to their own devices, they just stand there. Like, they have no brain and they're not possessed by an evil entity. So, the idea of an oxen, which has been turned into a zombie, aside from the fact that it's going to smell disgusting and probably explode at some point, but if you can keep this thing working on your farm, it's a huge benefit. It doesn't require any food. It can carry on working 24/7. It's easy to control. And yeah, the only problem is that if you do that to all of your oxen, you're not going to have any more oxen, and also other livestock will not want to go anywhere near this thing. But I see somebody like a turnip farmer or something like that with an undead oxen to plough their fields is a pretty good idea, really. But then again, it's disgusting. I don't know if you've ever been near a dead animal before. They don't smell good, and they're a source of disease. My comment filter is going crazy, all these necromancy comments. Yeah, most necromancy in D&D uses negative energy. Negative energy is anti-life. Yeah, so it's anathema to life. It creates a vacuum of life that can only be filled by creatures dying, essentially. So it's a problem. It's entropy. Like, if you could use concentrated entropy, which is crazy. One of the best, from a biological perspective, it's a negative. So what you're trying to do is you're replacing the neutron cascade in biological science of organic chemistry. Where essentially you've got electron shells around the thing, and it's shifting down and it's exchanging electrons through chemistry. In necromantic biology, it's reversed. So it's you need to feed energy into it, and that provides, it's sucking energy that provides the actual chemical force for things to go forward. So it's a complete reverse. The problem is that it doesn't generate energy, so it actually is a net reverse. So it actually does, if a farmer uses a lot of necromantic animals and livestock and stuff on their farm, it's going to gradually, slowly but surely, destroy the ability of the land to produce food. It's going to cause the whole area to become down and depressed. And also, if there's a high concentration of this negative energy in the area, you're literally going to have people who die outside of, who are buried outside of holy ground and stuff like that, rising from the dead spontaneously. People who have horrible traumatic deaths will rise as spirits and ghosts and entities, unable to pass on through the ethereal border because they're being drawn in by negative energy somehow. That's the whole idea behind, it's a plague. I love how this has got everybody really fired up. No, there are other types of entities, Dragon Turtle. So they're not the spirits of dead people who are trying to get back to the mortal world. Although there is a fair amount of lost souls wandering around the ethereal who just refuse to pass on. But there's actually a current in the ethereal which draws souls inexorably towards the fugue plane, and then from there they get divided off into the astral plane. So it's actually quite hard for creatures to stay around in the border ethereal, because the deep ethereal it will literally snatch them out of there and take them away like a wind. Yeah, it absolutely would upset the clerics and paladins, if they knew that a necromancer was raising people from the dead. Don't forget, necromancer healer. Oh, don't even get me started. Don't forget that we have knowledge of how the D&D multiverse works. The characters, even characters who are involved with gods and the holy things, clerics and priests and paladins, don't have that awareness of the world. So they don't know that there's a negative energy plane. They don't know that the ethereal has the fugue plane and goes onto the astral plane and the outer realms and things like that. They don't know that. They only know the mythology and what they're taught in their religions. They don't have experience of all those different things. Quite often, if they went and visited an outer plane of existence, they would think that they are going crazy, or they would have no idea what's going on. And even when they come back, they would have a hard time reconciling the fact of what they've known in life with what they've just experienced. And not only that, but it would be a different experience from somebody else who went to this very same outer plane, because they've got different perspectives and see things differently, and the plane would actually appear different to them depending on their beliefs and things. So it's really weird. When they see a corpse stand up and walk around, they don't necessarily know that it's not the same person stuck in there. They don't know that, they see the face of that person and they'll talk to them like that person. And then when that person turns around and kills them, they'd say, being raised from the dead turns you into an evil person. They wouldn't know. Something's gone horribly wrong. They may see necromancers as usurping the god's power to raise people from the dead. And if a mortal does it without the god's permission, it will always result in somebody being evil, for instance. They don't know that it's a different entity. So, yeah. A lot of people forget the fact that player characters are ignorant of the larger multiverse. What are the spirits that animate soulless undead then? Well, there's creatures that live in the negative energy plane. Quite a few, actually. Darren, yeah, Vorpal Sword can cut off a dragon's head if you roll a natural 20. Any creature with a head. Yeah, the public school system of Faerun. That's one thing you don't see, is schools in D&D. Have you noticed? You don't see children's schools in D&D, so it's assumed that most children are raised in the family following along the trade that their parents do. You don't see, Waterdeep Primary, Waterdeep Intermediate, Waterdeep High School. No. No teenage drama. No Buffy the Vampire Slayer. Sounds like Vorpal Swords are OP. Yeah, that's the whole point. You got to roll a natural 20. Case in point, we had a climactic battle in one campaign, and my character had a Vorpal Sword, and he rolled a natural 20 on the very first round and lopped that creature's head off. It was a giant. And the DM went, and radically redesigned the encounter on the spot, and that monster was resurrected. And I went, hacks! Broken. And afterwards he said, yeah, I really wasn't expecting you to kill him in the first round. Jason, that's the medieval, D&D is a medieval Earth argument. in old times on Earth they were certainly, but in Dungeons and Dragons, no, they probably weren't getting married at the age of 14. They're probably getting married at the age of 22 to 30. Not only that, but don't forget in Dungeons and Dragons you've got races like elves and dwarves and such that live for a very long time. So an average lifespan of a dwarf is 300 odd years. Now, if you've got a society which includes long-lived races, is there more of a, you're a human, you only get to live for a short amount of time, so make the most of it, get married and have babies while you're young? Of course, it's got a lot to do with the environment that that person is raised in, the sort of family they come from, the socio-economic background that they come from, and of course just opportunity, you know. So if you're a young Faerunian, say you came from Cormier, for instance, and you're on the frontier, and a town a couple of days' ride away got recently ransacked by goblins, and a lot of people that you knew personally got killed. On Earth, in war-torn situations and things like that, where there's the threat of conflict and death, people get pretty prone to forming relationships young and having children and things like that. I don't know whether it's some sort of biological imperative or whatever, but the threat, the danger of it, builds pretty intense relationships and babies result. In situations where you've got a large metropolitan city, like Waterdeep, for instance, you may find that people don't have children until much later in life because they're in a stable sort of a situation where they're not under threat all the time. So it's a very nuanced question. How common is that sort of knowledge for a planeswalker? What sort of knowledge are you talking about, Dragon Turtle? Like the nature of the multiverse? How do people see elf-human relationships since one lives about a tenth of the other's lifespan? Well, obviously there's going to be a lot of prejudice on the part of the elves, but also, particularly in Forgotten Realms, the elves have gone through a lot. They're at the end stages of an exodus where their culture has literally left the shores of Faerun, very much like the Tolkien idea of that culture receding from the world. And this happened hundreds of years ago. Waterdeep is a place where there's elven history and Netherese history as well. And the Netherese Empire sort of rose up after the elves were in the process of leaving the world. They had a lot of their own wars and conflicts and things like that, and the orcs were just an increasing threat that was rampaging through the region again and again and again. So the elves just basically went, you know what, we're just going to leave. The coronals that were in charge of the elven population went, we would be better suited going elsewhere and leaving the younger races to their games. Kiransali was erased from existence? Really? Well, that's one way that you get rid of a god. Anyway, so there's a lot of prejudice on behalf of the elves in particular with breeding with humans. Humans, of course, would see it as nothing but awesome. So it's a very tricky situation. The bonus, I suppose, would be... oh, right, well, planeswalkers have experience of what they've seen and what they experience. So they've explored a different path, you know. So it's tricky to say what does a planeswalker know. They know what they've seen. They don't necessarily read about sigil and portals and things like that. They've experienced it through adventure. And if they ever sit down and write their memoirs, and that memoirs gets passed around, there may be a lot of inaccuracies in there, based on their own observations being kind of wrong, misconstrued. So I would say that there's just as much misinformation on the world and magic and the different planes of existence as there is actual factual information, and only the wisest and most widely read scholars would be able to sift out the grains of truth from it. Elves frolic in the forest and not have babies with humans. Yeah. It's time for me to go already, everybody. Ferris dragons. Well, I suppose Ferris dragons have the same sort of origin as other dragons. Dragons existed and only divided up into the metallic and chromatic thing because of essentially gods, really. They had a civil war. Once upon a time, dragons were much more cohesive and solid as a culture. Cast Plan B. Hey, Jan Chivik. Will I make a video about clockwork contraptions? Yeah, maybe. So one of the things with the channel, generally speaking, is I do pay attention to the amount of views that things get, and generally I know that a topic is good and is getting a lot of attention from people if it's got around 10,000 views by the end of the month. Of course, as my channel grows and grows, that level is going up a bit. Some subjects just don't get a lot of views. Some subjects do get a lot of views and are much more encouraged to make videos about them. Happily, I can say that magic items is one of the things that gets a lot of views. Dragons get a lot of views. Demons, devils, outer planar stuff get a lot of views. Old school monsters that I'm bringing to updating and comparing to modern versions of them, or making homebrew newer versions of them, get a lot of views. That sort of thing. So I've got a pretty good idea of what everybody wants me to do. And the good news is that I don't feel pigeonholed by that, because there's just so much information to cover that I have no end of amount of information to do. I do feel a little bit pigeonholed sometimes by the requests that people have for things, because although I like to make things that people want me to make for them, sometimes they'll ask really specific questions and things, and I know that it's information that people just don't have any interest in, or it's a monster or something that the reason why they can't find any information is the same reason why I don't really want to make a video on it, because there just isn't any information on it apart from a little bit here or there. So one example would be a specific version of a monster that's just a little bit different from some other version that is for some specific setting or novel, for instance. And yeah, it's just really not that interesting. Like the difference between a Baelnorn and a Lich, for instance, is lore-wise, it's vanishingly interesting. They're quite similar in many ways. So it would be kind of like, I could make a video about it, but I don't think it would make a huge difference to somebody's campaign, really. You could just throw in the stats for a Lich there and it wouldn't really matter. Otherwise it's just story. Other things, of course, are really interesting. Like a lot of the dragons and things like that, they seem like it's like over the top amount of different dragons there are. But don't forget, this is over 40 years of game building and storytelling and all the different settings and stuff. So there's a lot of information that I can throw in there. That's one of the reasons why I'm quite interested in the Windukes and things, is because this is historic information in Dungeons and Dragons that has played a very large part in the construction of the Outer Planes lore, and the whole good and evil, Outer Planes politics, that sort of things, is really quite interesting. So I will be bringing us a video on the Vati at some point. Also, recommended reading is The Lost Empires of Faerun. If you want a really good grounding on the old empires and things like that, and the reason why it's called the Forgotten Realms, and the fact that it's, the current society of Dungeons and Dragons, the Sword Coast and things like that, is a Mad Max dystopian future wasteland of many empires that the current world of D&D is sitting on the bones of. The idea that Where did all these dungeons come from? Dungeons and Dragons. The dungeons come from all these old cultures and events that happened in the past. So learning about these events and the history and things like that means that when your characters go out adventuring into the wilderness and they drop down a well shaft or something like that and they break open into an ancient tomb of something, a dungeon master who's read up on this sort of stuff will have a huge advantage on storytelling and things, because they would actually make a cohesive, makes sense, really interesting and engaging story about a lost empire and how these characters have just broken into and exposed something which has been lost and hidden for years, setting off whole chains of events which really set the entire idea of the Forgotten Realms on fire. It's incredibly rich and nuanced because of that really great legacy. And that's the whole point of that setting, in a way. It's perfectly fine to run a Forgotten Realms campaign where you're playing Acquisitions Incorporated and you're only really interested in what's going on in the here and now and the current live cultures and things like that. But if you never pay any attention to the reason why it's called the Forgotten Realms, then you're missing out on a lot of really great resources, you know. But it's perfectly fine to say, look, I want to run a game which is like Last Action Hero, you know, where creatures from mythology and legend that were in stories and storybooks and things suddenly come to life and step through this portal because somebody made a device which is infused with far realm energies which turn actual stories into actual creatures from other alternate dimensions which step through into the real world. Suddenly they're no longer bound by the restrictions of story and can do what they intended to do. That's an interesting idea. So yeah, that's about it for me, everybody. Thank you very, very much for tuning in. You just now realize that Voldemort is a lich. Yeah. When does Netherall 2 Part 2 come out? Unfortunately, the Netherall video is one of those videos that wasn't particularly popular. Much as I'd love to do a video series on exploring Faerun, yeah, I will. I'm still going to make the Netherall Part 2 video at some point because I'm interested in it. But yeah, if it's not supported by people watching it, then why would I do it? Oh, I'll let you know, Dragon Turtle, for sure. For those of you who don't know, the channel is doing really well. Even though the subscriber count is quite low, my view count is massively high. So I've actually got the viewership of a channel with 164,000 subscribers. So it's doing really well. So thank you all very, very much for tuning in. I wish more people would subscribe. It does make a difference. But yeah, professionally, the channel's doing pretty well. And I'm nothing but encouraged to keep producing content for everybody. Alright, catch you next weekend, everyone. More videos to come, obviously.